The stone is already in place. Millions of blocks, each one cut and shaped and hauled across sand, each one lifted and positioned with care that borders on reverence. The pyramid rises from the plateau at Giza, its sides catching the first light of morning, its peak pointing toward a sky that has watched over this land since before there were names for the gods. This is not the beginning. The first settlements along the Nile, the unification of the two lands, the experiments with stone and form, all of that has already happened, has already been set in motion. Sneferu has built his pyramids, has learned the lessons that needed to be learned, has perfected the techniques that will make what comes next possible. But what comes next is something different, something larger, something that will stand for more than 4,000 years, that will become the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, that will define Egypt in ways that even the Egyptians themselves could not have anticipated. The workers are already moving. They have been moving since before dawn, since the moment when the stars began to fade and the eastern horizon turned from black to gray to pale amber. They walk in groups, carrying tools, ropes, water skins. Some are heading to the quarries, where the day's blocks will be cut from the living rock. Others are heading to the pyramid itself, where yesterday's blocks are waiting to be lifted, positioned, locked into place. The air is cool now, but it will not stay that way. By midday, the sun will be merciless, the heat radiating from the stone, from the sand, from the very air itself. But the workers know this. They have learned to pace themselves, to work in the early morning and the late afternoon, to rest during the worst of the heat, to drink water constantly, to watch for the signs of exhaustion in themselves and in each other. They are building eternity. They know this, even if they do not think of it in those terms. They are building the king's eternal home, the place where he will rest after his transformation, where he will continue to exist, to rule, to maintain Ma'at even in death. The king's name is Khufu. He is the son of Sneferu, the heir to everything his father achieved, the ruler of Egypt at the height of its power. He has been planning this pyramid for years, perhaps since before he even took the throne. He has consulted with architects and engineers, with priests and astronomers, with anyone who might have knowledge that could be useful. And now the work has begun. The foundation has been laid, perfectly level, aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that will astonish later generations. The first courses of stone are in place, massive blocks of limestone forming the base, the platform upon which everything else will rest. The pyramid will take decades to complete. Khufu knows this. He is young, healthy, but he is also realistic. He may not live to see it finished, but that does not matter. What matters is that the work continues, that the vision is realized, that when he dies, whenever that may be, there will be a place ready to receive him, a structure worthy of a god-king, a monument that will proclaim his power and his divinity for all time. If these quiet journeys through history bring you rest, you're always welcome to return. The plateau at Giza is changing. What was once empty bedrock is becoming a construction site, a place of constant activity, of noise and dust and the smell of sweat and stone. But there is order in the chaos. Everything is organized, planned, coordinated. The workers know their roles. The overseers know their responsibilities. The scribes keep track of everything. How many blocks were moved today? How much grain was distributed? Which crews performed well, and which need additional supervision? This is the machinery of the Egyptian state in action. This is what centuries of development have made possible: the ability to mobilize thousands of people, to sustain them, to organize their labor, to transform raw stone into something that will outlast empires. The sun is higher now. The light is harder, brighter, casting sharp shadows across the plateau. The pyramid rises, still incomplete, still growing, but already impressive, already proclaiming what it will become. The age of the Great Pyramids has begun. Khufu inherited a kingdom that had solved its fundamental problems. The Nile flooded reliably. The harvests were abundant. The borders were secure. The administration functioned smoothly, collecting taxes, organizing labor, maintaining the irrigation systems that made agriculture possible. The gods were honored, the temples were endowed, Ma'at was maintained. This was the world Sneferu had left to his son. A world of order and prosperity, of divine kingship and monumental building, of a civilization confident in its own permanence. But Khufu wanted more than continuity. He wanted transcendence. The decision to build at Giza was deliberate. The plateau was visible from Memphis, the capital, a prominent feature of the landscape that could be seen from miles away. It was also geologically suitable. Solid limestone bedrock that could support enormous weight, with quarries nearby that could provide the millions of blocks that would be needed. But there was another reason, one that had to do with symbolism, with the way the Egyptians understood the relationship between the living and the dead, between earth and sky. Giza was on the west bank of the Nile. The west was the direction of the setting sun, the place where Ra descended each evening into the underworld, where he battled the forces of chaos before emerging victorious at dawn. The west was the realm of the dead, the place where the deceased went to join Osiris, to be judged, to continue their existence in the afterlife. To build the pyramid on the west bank was to align it with these cosmic forces, to make it part of the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, to ensure that the king's journey to the afterlife would be successful, that he would join Ra in the solar bark, that he would become one with the gods. The pyramid was not just a tomb. It was a machine for resurrection, a carefully designed structure that would facilitate the king's transformation from mortal to divine, from Horus to Osiris, from earthly ruler to eternal presence. The internal chambers reflected this purpose. Deep within the pyramid, cut into the bedrock beneath the structure, was a chamber that may have been intended as the original burial place. But the plan changed during construction, as it often did. A second chamber was built higher up within the body of the pyramid itself, sometimes called the Queen's Chamber, though it was never intended for a queen. And above that, reached by a grand gallery that rose at a steep angle through the heart of the pyramid, was the King's Chamber. This was where Khufu would be laid to rest, in a granite sarcophagus, surrounded by the objects he would need in the afterlife, protected by millions of tons of stone. The king's chamber was built entirely of granite, brought from quarries at Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. The blocks were massive, some weighing 50 tons or more. Transporting them required boats, sledges, ramps, and the coordinated effort of hundreds of workers. Lifting them into position, high within the pyramid, required engineering solutions that we can only partially reconstruct. Above the king's chamber were 5 relieving chambers, spaces designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid away from the burial chamber, to prevent the ceiling from collapsing under the enormous pressure. The Egyptians understood structural engineering in ways that were sophisticated and practical, even if they did not express their knowledge in mathematical formulas or written treatises. The pyramid's dimensions were not arbitrary. The base was a square, each side measuring approximately 230 meters, aligned to the cardinal directions with extraordinary precision. The angle of the sides was just over 51 degrees, creating a structure that rose to a height of nearly 147 meters. These numbers had meaning. The pyramid's proportions encoded mathematical relationships. The ratio of the perimeter to the height approximated the value of pi, though whether this was intentional or coincidental remains debated. The alignment to the cardinal directions required astronomical observations, careful measurements, knowledge of the stars and their movements. The Egyptians did not build randomly. Every aspect of the pyramid was considered, calculated, imbued with significance. The structure was a physical manifestation of cosmic order, a representation in stone of the principles that governed the universe. Khufu himself remains somewhat mysterious. Unlike later pharaohs who left extensive records of their deeds, their military campaigns, their building projects, Khufu is known primarily through his pyramid. There are a few small statues, a handful of inscriptions, references in later texts. But the man himself, his personality, his beliefs, his daily life, is largely lost to us. Later traditions were not kind to him. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing more than 2,000 years after Khufu's death, portrayed him as a tyrant who enslaved his people to build his monument, who closed the temples and oppressed the population. But Herodotus was repeating stories told by Egyptian priests who lived in a very different Egypt, who may have had their own reasons for criticizing the Old Kingdom pharaohs. The archaeological evidence tells a different story. The workers who built the pyramid were not slaves, but Egyptians, fed and housed by the state, organized into crews, working during the inundation season when agricultural labor was impossible. They left graffiti on the blocks, boasting about their crews, declaring their loyalty to the king. They were buried in cemeteries near the pyramid, honored for their service, provided with offerings to sustain them in the afterlife. Khufu's reign lasted approximately 23 years, though the exact dates are uncertain. During that time, the pyramid rose, course by course, year by year. The work was constant, relentless, requiring the coordination of thousands of workers, the management of vast resources, the solution of countless engineering problems. The outer casing of the pyramid was made of fine white limestone, quarried from Tura on the east bank of the Nile. These blocks were cut with extraordinary precision, fitted together so tightly that a knife blade could not be inserted between them. When the pyramid was complete, when the casing stones were in place and polished, the structure would have gleamed in the sunlight, visible for miles, a beacon of white stone rising from the desert plateau. The capstone, the pyramidion that would crown the structure, was probably gilded or made of electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. It would have caught the first rays of the sun at dawn, blazing with light, proclaiming the pyramid's connection to Ra, to the solar cycle, to the eternal renewal of life. But the pyramid was not alone. Around it, Khufu built a complex of structures, a mortuary temple on the east side, where offerings would be made to his spirit, a causeway leading down to a valley temple near the Nile, subsidiary pyramids for queens or other members of the royal family, mastaba tombs for high officials who wanted to be buried near their king. The mortuary temple was where the rituals would be performed, where priests would present food and drink to Khufu's Ka, where the daily cycle of offerings would ensure his continued existence in the afterlife. The temple was built of limestone and granite, decorated with reliefs showing the king in various ritual poses, receiving offerings, smiting enemies, performing the ceremonies that maintained Ma'at. The causeway was a covered corridor, its walls decorated with scenes of daily life, of the king's achievements, of the resources of Egypt being brought to the pyramid. It connected the valley temple, where the king's body would arrive by boat after his death, to the mortuary temple and the pyramid itself. The journey along the causeway was symbolic, a transition from the world of the living to the world of the dead, from the Nile Valley to the desert plateau, from earth to eternity. The subsidiary pyramids are smaller, simpler structures, but they were important. They may have housed the burials of Khufu's queens, or they may have served other ritual purposes, perhaps as symbolic tombs for the king's Ka, or as representations of the primordial mound from which creation emerged. The mastaba tombs of the officials were arranged in neat rows, forming streets of the dead, a necropolis that mirrored the organization of the living world. These officials had served Khufu in life, as viziers, as treasurers, as overseers of works, and they wanted to continue serving him in death, to remain close to their king, to share in his eternal existence. The construction of the Great Pyramid required resources on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million blocks of stone, averaging 2.5 tons each. Some blocks, particularly those used in the king's chamber and the relieving chambers above it, weigh much more, 50 tons, 60 tons, even more. These blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and lifted into place. The quarrying was done with copper tools and stone hammers, the blocks being cut from the bedrock by creating channels around them, then using wooden wedges soaked in water to split them free. The shaping was done with copper chisels and grinding stones, the surfaces being dressed smooth, the edges being made straight. The transportation required sledges, ropes, and human muscle. The blocks were loaded onto wooden sledges, which were then dragged across the sand, sometimes on tracks made of logs, sometimes on paths that had been wetted to reduce friction. Experiments have shown that a team of 20 to 30 men could move a 2-ton block this way, though it required coordination, strength, and endurance. The lifting was the greatest challenge. As the pyramid rose, the blocks had to be raised higher and higher, eventually to heights of more than 100 meters. The Egyptians did not have cranes or pulleys as we know them. They used ramps, long, sloping structures made of mud, brick, and rubble, rising alongside the pyramid or spiraling around it. The exact configuration of these ramps is debated. A straight ramp would have had to be enormously long to reach the top of the pyramid at a manageable angle. A spiral ramp would have been more compact, but would have obscured the corners of the pyramid, making it difficult to maintain the precise alignment. Perhaps they used a combination, straight ramps for the lower courses, spiral ramps for the upper ones, or internal ramps built into the structure itself. Whatever the method, it worked. The pyramid rose. The blocks were positioned with extraordinary accuracy. The structure remained stable, solid, capable of supporting its own immense weight. Khufu must have visited the construction site regularly, must have watched the pyramid grow, must have felt a mixture of pride and anxiety as the work progressed. This was his legacy, his claim to immortality, the structure that would ensure his name would be remembered forever. And it was. The Great Pyramid became the most famous structure in the ancient world, the standard against which all other pyramids were measured. Later, pharaohs would try to match it, to surpass it, but none would succeed. The Great Pyramid remained the largest, the most precisely built, the most enduring monument to the power and ambition of the Old Kingdom. When Khufu died, his body was mummified, wrapped in linen, placed in the granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber. The pyramid was sealed, the entrance hidden, the mortuary cult established. Priests would make offerings in perpetuity, ensuring that Khufu's Ka would be sustained, that he would continue to exist in the afterlife, that he would join Ra in the solar bark, sailing across the sky each day, bringing light and life to the world. The pyramid stood, silent and eternal, a mountain of stone on the desert plateau, visible from Memphis, from the Nile, from the fields where farmers worked, and the villages where families lived. It was a reminder of the king's power, of his divinity, of the order that he maintained, of the promise that death was not an ending, but a transformation. The river kept flowing. The sun kept rising. And at Giza, the Great Pyramid stood, perfect and complete, the ultimate expression of everything Egypt had become. The workers wake before dawn. They sleep in long, low buildings made of mud brick, dormitories that house dozens of men in rows of simple beds, wooden frames strung with rope or reed matting, a thin blanket, perhaps a headrest carved from wood. The air inside is close, thick with the smell of bodies and breath, but it is cooler than outside, sheltered from the wind that sweeps across the plateau at night. Someone stirs first, always someone, and the movement spreads. Men sit up, rub their eyes, reach for water jars kept near their beds. They dress in simple linen kilts, wrap cloth around their heads to protect against the sun. Some are young, in their 20s, strong and eager. Others are older, veterans of previous building seasons, men who know the work, who understand the rhythms, who can pace themselves for the long day ahead. They file out into the pre-dawn darkness, joining the streams of workers emerging from other dormitories, all moving in the same direction, toward the communal areas where the day will begin. The workers' village at Giza is a temporary city, built to house the thousands of men who will spend the next 2 decades constructing the Great Pyramid. It is organized, planned, laid out in a grid that makes it easy to navigate even in darkness. There are dormitories for the workers, separate quarters for the overseers and scribes, workshops where tools are made and repaired, bakeries that produce the bread that is the staple of the Egyptian diet, breweries that produce the beer that is safer to drink than water. The village is not permanent. When the pyramid is complete, when Khufu is buried and the mortuary cult is established, the village will be abandoned, dismantled, its mud bricks returning to the earth from which they came. But for now, it is home to thousands, a community with its own rhythms, its own hierarchies, its own sense of purpose. The first meal of the day is simple. Bread, onions, perhaps some dried fish. The bread is coarse, made from emmer wheat, gritty with sand from the grinding stones. It is filling, substantial, designed to provide energy for the physical labor ahead. The onions are sharp, pungent, believed to have medicinal properties to ward off illness. The fish is salty, preserved, a source of protein. The workers eat quickly, efficiently. There is little conversation. They are saving their energy, their breath, for the work. They drink beer, thick and nutritious, only mildly alcoholic, more like liquid bread than the beer we know today. It provides calories, hydration, a sense of well-being that makes the work more bearable. As the sky begins to lighten, the workers gather in their crews. The crews are the basic unit of organization, groups of 20 to 40 men who work together, who develop their own identities, their own names. The names are recorded in graffiti found on blocks deep within the pyramid. The followers of the powerful white crown of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkaure, names that suggest pride, camaraderie, a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Each crew has a foreman, a man who has proven himself capable, who understands the work, who can motivate his men and solve problems as they arise. The foreman reports to an overseer who manages multiple crews, who coordinates their efforts, who ensures that the work proceeds according to plan. And above the overseers are the architects and engineers, the men who designed the pyramid, who understand the mathematics and the astronomy, who can calculate angles and weights and stresses, who make the decisions that determine whether the structure will stand or collapse. The work varies depending on the season, the stage of construction, the specific needs of the day. Some crews work in the quarries, cutting blocks from the bedrock. This is hard, repetitive labor, marking out the block, cutting channels around it, driving wooden wedges into the channels and soaking them with water so they expand and split the stone free, then shaping the block, dressing its surfaces smooth. Other crews transport the blocks from the quarries to the pyramid. They load the blocks onto wooden sledges, attach ropes, and pull. 20 men, 30 men, sometimes more, all pulling together, their movements synchronized, their breathing coordinated. The sledges slide across the sand, sometimes on wooden rollers, sometimes on paths that have been wetted to reduce friction. It is exhausting work, but it is also rhythmic, almost meditative, the kind of work where the mind can wander while the body performs its task. Still other crews work at the pyramid itself, lifting blocks into position. This is the most challenging work, requiring not just strength but precision, coordination, the ability to work at heights, to balance on narrow ledges, to maneuver massive stones into exact positions. The blocks are lifted using ramps, long, sloping structures that rise alongside the pyramid. The ramps are made of mud, brick, and rubble, reinforced with wooden beams, wide enough for multiple crews to work simultaneously. As the pyramid rises, the ramps are extended, raised, adapted to the changing needs of the construction. The blocks are dragged up the ramps on sledges, then positioned using levers and wooden rockers, tools that allow the workers to shift the blocks incrementally, to adjust their placement, to ensure that they fit tightly against the blocks already in place. The work requires patience, attention to detail, the willingness to make small adjustments until everything is perfect. The sun rises higher. The temperature climbs. By mid-morning, the heat is intense, radiating from the stone, from the sand, from the very air. The workers sweat, their skin glistening, their kilts soaked. They drink constantly from water jars that are refilled throughout the day, carried by boys who move among the crews, ensuring that no one becomes dehydrated. The work slows during the hottest part of the day. Some crews take breaks, resting in whatever shade they can find, under awnings, in the shadow of the pyramid itself, in temporary shelters built for this purpose. They eat a midday meal, more bread, more onions, perhaps some vegetables, occasionally meat on festival days, or when a crew has performed exceptionally well. The overseers move among the workers, observing, encouraging, correcting. They carry staffs, symbols of their authority, but they rarely use them. The workers are not slaves, not prisoners. They are Egyptians serving their king, participating in something sacred. They are motivated by pride, by loyalty, by the belief that they are building eternity, that their labor will ensure the king's successful journey to the afterlife, that their names, or at least the names of their crews, will be remembered. The scribes are everywhere, recording everything. They sit in the shade, with their palettes and papyrus, noting how many blocks were moved today, which crews performed well, which workers were absent or injured. They keep track of the grain distributed, the beer brewed, the tools issued and returned. They are the memory of the project, ensuring that nothing is forgotten, that every detail is documented. The work is dangerous. Accidents happen. Blocks slip. Ropes break. Workers fall. There are injuries, broken bones, crushed fingers, backs strained from lifting. The Egyptians have medical knowledge, physicians who can set bones, treat wounds, prescribe remedies. But some injuries are beyond their ability to heal. Some workers die, and when they do, they are buried with honor in the workers' cemetery near the pyramid, their graves marked, their names recorded, their service to the king acknowledged. The cemetery tells us something important about how the Egyptians viewed these workers. They were not expendable. They were valued members of society, worthy of proper burial, of offerings, of remembrance. Their tombs are modest compared to those of the elite, but they are tombs nonetheless, evidence that even in death these men were respected for what they had accomplished. The afternoon brings a slight cooling, a shift in the wind. The work resumes its full pace. The crews that rested during the heat of midday return to their tasks. The sound of stone on stone, of ropes creaking, of men calling to each other, fills the air. It is a constant background noise, the sound of creation, of human effort transforming raw material into something that will endure. As the sun begins to descend toward the western horizon, the work gradually winds down. The last blocks of the day are positioned. The tools are collected and returned to the workshops. The ramps are inspected for damage and repaired as needed. The workers make their way back to the village, tired, hungry, ready for the evening meal. The evening meal is the largest of the day. There is bread, of course, always bread, but also vegetables, lentils, chickpeas, lettuce, cucumbers. Sometimes there is fish, caught in the Nile and brought to the village. On special occasions there is meat, beef or goat, roasted or stewed, distributed to the crews as a reward for exceptional work or to mark a festival. The workers eat together, sitting in groups, talking, laughing, sharing stories. The atmosphere is relaxed, convivial. These men have spent the day working side by side, have shared the heat and the exhaustion and the satisfaction of seeing the pyramid grow. They have formed bonds, friendships that will last beyond the construction project, that will connect them for the rest of their lives. After the meal, there is time for rest, for leisure. Some men play games. Senyet, a board game that is popular throughout Egypt, or simple games of chance played with dice or knucklebones. Others tell stories, recounting tales of the gods, of legendary kings, of adventures and battles and romances. Still others simply sit, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, enjoying the cool evening air after the heat of the day. The stars are important to the Egyptians. They are not just points of light, but gods, celestial beings who influence events on earth. The priests study the stars, track their movements, use them to calculate the calendar, to determine the proper times for festivals and rituals. The workers may not understand the complex astronomy, but they know the major constellations, can recognize the stars that mark the seasons, that signal the coming of the inundation. The work at Giza follows the rhythm of the agricultural year. During the inundation season, when the Nile floods and the fields are underwater, the workers come to the plateau in large numbers. This is when the heaviest work is done, when the most blocks are moved, when the pyramid grows most rapidly. The farmers have no agricultural work during this season, and serving on the pyramid project provides them with food, shelter, and a sense of purpose. During the growing season, when the floodwaters recede and the fields need to be planted, many workers return to their villages. The workforce at Giza shrinks, though it never disappears entirely. There is always work to be done: quarrying, shaping blocks, maintaining the ramps, preparing for the next building season. During the harvest season, when the crops are gathered and the granaries are filled, some workers return to Giza, though not in the same numbers as during the inundation. The harvest is crucial, the time when Egypt's wealth is generated, when the taxes are collected that will support the king and his projects. But once the harvest is complete, once the grain is stored, the workers are free to return to the pyramid. This seasonal rhythm means that the pyramid takes decades to complete. It cannot be rushed. The work must be done carefully, precisely, with attention to detail that ensures the structure will stand for millennia. And the workforce must be sustained, fed, housed, kept healthy, and motivated throughout the long years of construction. The logistics are staggering. Feeding thousands of workers requires vast quantities of grain, which must be grown, harvested, stored, and distributed. Housing them requires the construction and maintenance of the workers' village. Providing them with tools requires workshops, craftsmen, raw materials, copper for chisels, wood for sledges and levers, rope made from papyrus or flax. All of this is managed by the bureaucracy, the vast administrative apparatus that is the backbone of the Egyptian state. Scribes keep track of everything. Officials make decisions. The vizier coordinates the entire operation, ensuring that resources flow where they are needed, that problems are solved, that the work continues without interruption. The workers themselves come from all over Egypt. Some are from villages near Gaza, but others have traveled from the Delta, from Upper Egypt, from the borders of Nubia. They bring with them different dialects, different customs, different local traditions. But at Gaza, they become the part of something larger, part of a national project that transcends regional differences, that unites them in service to the king and the gods. This is one of the functions of the Pyramid Project, not just to build a tomb for the king, but to create a sense of national identity, to remind Egyptians that they are part of a single civilization, that they share a common purpose, that their individual efforts contribute to something eternal. As night falls, the village grows quiet. The workers retire to their dormitories, exhausted from the day's labor. They sleep deeply, dreamlessly, their bodies recovering, preparing for the next day's work. Outside, the guards patrol, ensuring that the tools and materials are secure, that no one disturbs the work site. Above, the stars wheel slowly across the sky. The constellation of Orion, which the Egyptians associate with Osiris, rises in the east. The Milky Way, which they call the Nile of the sky, stretches overhead. The pyramid, still incomplete, rises dark against the stars, a shadow, a promise, a work in progress. Tomorrow, the workers will wake before dawn. They will eat their simple meal, gather in their crews, return to the work. Block by block, course by course, the pyramid will grow. And one day, years from now, it will be complete, and the workers will return to their villages, and the pyramid will stand silent and eternal, a monument to their labor, to their skill, to their belief that they were building something that would last forever. The Great Pyramid stands complete. Khufu is dead, mummified, sealed within the king's chamber deep in the heart of his monument. The mortuary cult has been established, the priests appointed, the endowments made. Every day, offerings are presented to his Ka, ensuring his continued existence in the afterlife, his journey with Ra across the sky, his eternal participation in the cosmic order. But the work at Giza is not finished. Khufu's son, a king named Khafre, ruled briefly after his father's death. He began a pyramid at Abu Rawash, north of Giza, but it was never completed. His reign was short, his pyramid abandoned, and when he died, the throne passed to another of Khufu's sons, a man who would return to Giza and build the second Great Pyramid. His name was Khafre. Khafre came to power around 2058 BCE, inheriting a kingdom that was still prosperous, still stable, still capable of undertaking monumental projects. He had watched his father's pyramid rise, had seen the organization required, the resources mobilized, the techniques perfected. He knew what was possible, and he knew what was expected of him. A king must build. This was understood, accepted, fundamental to the nature of Egyptian kingship. The pyramid was not optional. It was the king's eternal home, the structure that would ensure his successful transformation from Horus to Osiris, from living God to eternal presence. Without a pyramid, the king's afterlife was uncertain, his continued existence in doubt. Khafre chose to build at Giza on the same plateau where his father's pyramid stood. This was significant. He could have chosen another site, could have established his own necropolis elsewhere, could have created a separate complex that would be his alone. But by building at Giza, he was making a statement about continuity, about dynasty, about the connection between father and son, between one reign and the next. Khafre's pyramid appears, from a distance, to be larger than Khufu's. This is an illusion, created by the fact that it sits on slightly higher ground and retains more of its original casing stones at the apex. In reality, it is slightly smaller. The base is about 215 meters on each side, compared to Khufu's 230 meters, and the original height was about 143 meters, compared to Khufu's 147 meters. But the difference is minimal. Khafre's pyramid is still massive, still impressive, still a monument worthy of a god-king. And in some ways it is more complete than Khufu's. Much of the smooth limestone casing remains intact near the top, giving us a glimpse of what all the pyramids would have looked like when they were new, gleaming white structures rising from the desert, their surfaces polished, their edges sharp, their forms perfect. The internal structure of Khafre's pyramid is simpler than Khufu's. There is no grand gallery, no complex system of relieving chambers. The burial chamber is cut partly into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, partly into the structure itself, a single room with a gabled ceiling, containing a granite sarcophagus that was found empty when the pyramid was first explored in modern times. The simplicity may reflect lessons learned from Khufu's pyramid, a recognition that complexity was not necessary, that a simpler design could be just as effective and perhaps more stable. Or it may simply reflect Khafre's preferences, his vision of what his eternal home should be. But Khafre's most enduring legacy is not his pyramid. It is the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most recognizable monuments in the world. A massive limestone sculpture with the body of a lion and the head of a human, carved from the bedrock of the plateau, facing east toward the rising sun. It is enormous, more than 70 meters long and 20 meters high, the largest monolithic statue from the ancient world. The face is believed to be Khafre's, though this is debated. The features are weathered, eroded by millennia of wind and sand, but they retain a sense of calm authority, of divine presence. The Sphinx wears the Neme's headdress, the striped cloth that was the symbol of kingship, and originally wore a ceremonial beard, fragments of which have been found. The Sphinx was not carved from transported blocks. It was cut directly from the bedrock, shaped from a natural outcropping of limestone that stood on the plateau. The workers removed the surrounding stone, leaving the Sphinx rising from the desert floor, a guardian, a symbol, a representation of the king's power and his connection to the divine. The body is that of a lion, the most powerful predator known to the Egyptians, a symbol of strength and royalty. The head is human, the king himself, combining human intelligence with animal power, creating a being that is more than either, that embodies the dual nature of kingship, human and divine, mortal and eternal. The Sphinx faces east, toward the rising sun, toward the daily rebirth of Ra. This orientation is deliberate, symbolic. The Sphinx is not just a statue but a participant in the cosmic cycle, a witness to the eternal return of light, a guardian of the threshold between night and day, between death and life. Around the Sphinx, Khafre built a temple, a place where rituals could be performed, where offerings could be made. The temple is simple, austere, built of massive limestone and granite blocks with pillared halls and open courtyards. It is a place of shadows and light, of stone and silence, designed to inspire awe, to remind visitors of the power of the gods and the king who served them. The Sphinx Temple, as it is now called, was connected to Khafre's Valley Temple by a causeway, creating a ritual landscape that linked the Nile Valley to the pyramid on the plateau, the world of the living to the world of the dead. The king's body would have traveled this route after his death, carried from the valley, temple up the causeway to the mortuary temple and, finally, to the pyramid itself. Khafre's Valley Temple is one of the best preserved structures from the Old Kingdom. It is built of massive granite blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, fitted together with extraordinary precision. The interior is dark, lit only by narrow slits in the walls, creating an atmosphere of mystery and sanctity. The temple once contained statues of Khafre, life-sized and larger, carved from diorite and other hard stones. One of these statues, found buried in a pit within the temple, is now in the Cairo Museum. It shows Khafre seated on a throne, the falcon god Horus perched behind his head, wings spread protectively. The king's face is calm, confident, eternal. This is not a portrait in the modern sense, but an idealized representation, showing the king as he wished to be remembered, young, strong, divine. The construction of Khafre's pyramid complex required the same massive mobilization of resources as Khufu's. Thousands of workers, organized into crews, laboring during the inundation season, fed and housed by the state. Quarries were opened, blocks were cut and transported, ramps were built and extended as the pyramid rose. But the techniques were refined now. the organization more efficient. The workers knew what they were doing, had learned from the construction of Khufu's pyramid, had developed methods and tools that made the work faster, safer, more predictable. The second pyramid took less time to build than the first, though it was still a project that consumed years, that required sustained effort across multiple building seasons. Khafre's reign lasted approximately 26 years. During that time, he maintained the prosperity and stability that his father had established. There were no major crises, no invasions, no famines. The Nile flooded reliably. The harvests were abundant. The administration functioned smoothly. Egypt was at peace, confident in its power, secure in its belief that Mahat was being maintained, that the cosmic order was intact. When Khafre died, he was buried in his pyramid, his body mummified, and placed in the granite sarcophagus, surrounded by offerings, protected by millions of tons of stone. His mortuary cult was established, his priests appointed, his eternal existence ensured, and the throne passed to the next king. Menkaure was Khafre's son, or possibly his grandson. The exact relationship is uncertain. He came to power around 2532 BCE, inheriting the same expectations, the same obligations, the same need to build a pyramid that would ensure his successful journey to the afterlife. But Menkaure's pyramid is different. It is smaller, much smaller than those of Khufu and Khafre. The base is only about 103 meters on each side, less than half the size of Khufu's pyramid. The original height was about 65 meters, less than half the height of the Great Pyramid. Why the reduction in size? The question has puzzled scholars. Was it a matter of resources, a recognition that the state could no longer support projects on the scale of Khufu and Khafre? Was it a change in religious belief, a sense that size was less important than other factors? Or was it simply Menkaure's choice, his preference for a more modest monument? The evidence suggests that resources were not the issue. Menkaure's pyramid, though smaller, is built with extraordinary care. The lower courses are cased in granite brought from Aswan, far more expensive and difficult to work than limestone. The quality of the construction is exceptional. The blocks fitted together with precision that equals or exceeds that of the larger pyramids. Menkaure also built 3 subsidiary pyramids, smaller structures that may have been intended for queens or other members of the royal family. And he built a mortuary temple and a valley temple, both substantial structures, both decorated with reliefs and statues. So the reduction in size was not due to poverty or decline. It was a deliberate choice, a different vision of what a pyramid should be. Later traditions were kind to Menkaure. Herodotus, the Greek historian, portrayed him as a pious and just king, in contrast to Khufu and Khafre, whom he depicted as tyrants. According to Herodotus, Menkaure reopened the temples that his predecessors had closed, allowed the people to return to their normal lives, and ruled with wisdom and compassion. This is almost certainly legend rather than history. There is no evidence that Khufu or Khafre closed temples or oppressed their people. But the legend tells us something about how later Egyptians remembered the pyramid builders, how they tried to make sense of the enormous effort required to build these monuments, how they reconciled the grandeur of the pyramids with their own values and beliefs. Menkaure's reign was relatively short, perhaps 28 years, though the exact dates are uncertain. He did not live to see his pyramid completed. When he died, the work was still ongoing, and it was finished by his successor, possibly in a hurried manner, with mud brick used for some of the structures that would normally have been built in stone. But the pyramid was completed, and Menkaure was buried there, his body placed in a basalt sarcophagus, his mortuary cult established, his eternal existence ensured. The three pyramids at Giza, Khufu's, Khafre's, and Menkaure's, stand together on the plateau, a family of monuments, a dynasty in stone. They are aligned, not perfectly, but deliberately, creating a visual harmony, a sense of order and continuity. From a distance, from the city of Memphis or from the Nile Valley, they dominate the landscape. Three massive structures rising from the desert, proclaiming the power of the kings who built them, the divinity of their rule, the permanence of Egypt itself. They are surrounded by smaller pyramids, by mastaba tombs, by temples and causeways, creating a vast necropolis, a city of the dead that mirrors the organization of the living world. The officials who served the kings in life are buried near them in death, maintaining the hierarchies, the relationships, the structures that defined Egyptian society. The Sphinx watches over all of it, facing east, waiting for the sun to rise, as it has waited for more than 4,000 years. The sand has buried it repeatedly, and repeatedly it has been excavated, cleared, restored. It has lost its beard, its nose, much of its original detail. But it endures, a symbol of Egypt, of the Old Kingdom, of the age when kings were gods and pyramids rose from the desert to touch the sky. The river keeps flowing. The sun keeps rising. And at Giza the pyramids stand, silent witnesses to an age of ambition and achievement, of belief and labor, of the conviction that death was not an ending but a transformation, that kings could become gods, that stone could hold eternity. The sun rises, and the world is reborn. This is not metaphor. This is truth, as the Egyptians understood it. Every morning, Ra emerges from the underworld, victorious over the forces of chaos, sailing his solar bark across the sky, bringing light and life to the world. Every evening he descends into the west, into the realm of the dead, where he will battle the serpent Apophis through the hours of darkness before emerging again at dawn. The cycle is eternal. It has always been this way, will always be this way, as long as Ma'at is maintained, as long as the proper rituals are performed, as long as the king fulfills his obligations to the gods. This is the foundation of Egyptian religion, the bedrock upon which everything else is built. The world is not random. It is ordered, structured, governed by principles that can be understood and honored. And at the center of this order stands the king, the living Horus, the son of Ra, the one who maintains the balance between cosmos and chaos. Ma'at is difficult to translate. It means truth, justice, order, balance, harmony. It is both a concept and a goddess, depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather on her head. The feather itself becomes a symbol, used in the judgment of the dead, where the heart of the deceased is weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine worthiness for eternal life. But Ma'at is more than a moral principle. It is cosmic law, the fundamental structure of reality. When Ma'at is maintained, the Nile floods, the crops grow, the sun rises, the stars follow their courses. When Ma'at is disrupted, chaos returns. Drought, famine, invasion, the breakdown of social order, the collapse of civilization itself. The king's primary responsibility is to maintain Ma'at. Everything else, building pyramids, conducting military campaigns, administering justice, performing rituals, serves this fundamental purpose. The king is the intermediary between the human and the divine, the one who ensures that the gods are honored, that offerings are made, that the cosmic order is preserved. The gods are everywhere in Egyptian life. Every town has its local deity, its temple, its festivals. But beyond the local gods are the great cosmic gods, the ones who govern the fundamental forces of nature, who created the world and sustain it. Ra is the sun god, the king of the gods, the creator. He is depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with the solar disk. He sails across the sky in his bark, accompanied by other gods, bringing light to the world. At night, he travels through the underworld, the Duat, battling the forces of chaos, ensuring that the sun will rise again. Osiris is the god of the dead, the ruler of the underworld. His myth is central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. He was a king, murdered by his brother Set, dismembered, scattered. But his wife Isis gathered the pieces, reassembled him, and through her magic brought him back to life, not to the world of the living, but to the world of the dead, where he became the eternal king, the judge of souls. Every king, when he dies, becomes Osiris. This is not symbolic. The Egyptians believed it literally. The king's mummification, his burial rituals, his pyramid, all of these are designed to facilitate his transformation, to ensure that he will join Osiris in the underworld, that he will be judged and found worthy, that he will continue to exist eternally. And when the king becomes Osiris, his son becomes Horus, the living god, the new king. This is the cycle of kingship, the pattern that ensures continuity, that connects each reign to the one before and the one after, that makes the monarchy eternal. Horus is the falcon god, the god of the sky, the protector of the king. He is depicted as a falcon or as a man with a falcon's head. His eyes are the sun and the moon, watching over Egypt, seeing everything. The king is Horus incarnate, the living god who rules on earth. Isis is the great mother goddess, the wife of Osiris, the mother of Horus. She is the embodiment of devotion, of magical power, of the fierce love that can overcome even death. Her cult will grow over the centuries, eventually spreading beyond Egypt to the entire Mediterranean world. But even in the Old Kingdom, she is revered, honored, essential to the mythology that structures Egyptian belief. Set is the god of chaos, of the desert, of storms and violence. He murdered Osiris, battled Horus for the throne, represents everything that threatens order and stability. But he is not purely evil. He also protects Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld, fighting against Apophis, the serpent of chaos. Set is necessary, part of the cosmic balance, the force that must be controlled but cannot be eliminated. The temples are the houses of the gods. Each temple contains a sanctuary, an innermost chamber where the god's statue resides. The statue is not a representation of the god. It is the god, or at least a vessel through which the god can manifest, can receive offerings, can interact with the human world. Every day, the priests perform the same rituals. At dawn, they enter the sanctuary, open the shrine, wash the statue, dress it in fresh linen, anoint it with oils, present it with food and drink. They recite prayers, burn incense, perform the gestures that awaken the god, that ensure the god's presence in the temple. These rituals are essential. Without them, the gods might withdraw, might cease to protect Egypt, might allow chaos to return. The priests are not just performing ceremonies. They are maintaining the cosmic order, ensuring that the world continues to function, that the sun rises, that the Nile floods, that life continues. The king participates in these rituals, or at least he is supposed to. In theory, every offering in every temple throughout Egypt is made by the king. In practice, priests act as his representatives, performing the rituals in his name. But the fiction is maintained. The temple reliefs show the king making offerings, the king performing rituals, the king as the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine. This is important. It reinforces the king's central role in Egyptian religion, his unique position as the living God, the one who can speak to the gods and convey their will to his subjects. The priests serve the gods, but they serve them in the king's name under his authority, as extensions of his divine power. The afterlife is not guaranteed. It must be earned, prepared for, achieved through proper ritual and moral conduct. The Egyptians believed that every person had multiple spiritual components: the Ka, the life force, the Ba, the personality or soul, the Aak, the transfigured spirit that could exist in the afterlife. When a person died, these components separated. The body remained in the tomb, but it had to be preserved, mummified, protected from decay. The Ka remained near the body, sustained by offerings of food and drink. The Bia could move between the tomb and the afterlife, could travel, could visit the places the deceased had known in life. But to achieve eternal life, to become an Ak, the deceased had to pass through judgment. In the Hall of Two Truths, before Osiris and 42 divine judges, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was light, unburdened by sin, the deceased was declared justified, worthy of eternal life. If the heart was heavy, weighed down by wrongdoing, it was devoured by Ammit, a demon with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. The deceased ceased to exist, suffered the second death, the final death from which there was no return. The pyramid texts are the oldest religious texts in the world, inscribed on the walls of the burial chambers in pyramids of the late Old Kingdom, beginning with the Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty. They are collections of spells, prayers, and incantations designed to help the deceased king navigate the afterlife, to protect him from dangers, to ensure his successful transformation into an Aakak. The texts are not systematic. They are fragmentary, sometimes contradictory, drawn from different traditions, different periods, different theological systems, but they reveal the complexity of Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife, the multiple paths the deceased could take, the various dangers and challenges that had to be overcome. Some spells describe the king ascending to the sky, joining Ra in the solar bark, sailing across the heavens. Others describe him descending to the underworld, joining Osiris, ruling over the dead. Still others describe him as a star, eternal and unchanging, watching over Egypt from the night sky. The pyramid texts also reveal the importance of knowledge, of knowing the right words, the right spells, the right names. The afterlife is not just a place but a journey, and the journey requires guidance. The deceased must know how to address the gods, how to answer their questions, how to navigate the passages and chambers of the underworld. This is why the texts are inscribed on the walls of the burial chamber. They are there to help the king, to remind him of what he needs to know, to provide him with the words that will ensure his safe passage. The texts are not meant to be read by the living. They are meant to be read by the dead, by the king's Ka or Bey, as he makes his journey to eternal life. The solar religion becomes increasingly important during the Old Kingdom. Ra is elevated above other gods, becomes a supreme deity, the creator, the one who brought the world into being. The king is the son of Ra, chosen by him, empowered by him, responsible to him. This solar theology is reflected in the architecture of the pyramids. The pyramid shape itself may represent the rays of the sun, descending from heaven to earth, or the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation. The pyramid is a stairway to heaven, a means by which the king can ascend to join Ra, to become one with the sun god, to participate in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The pyramid complexes include solar temples, places where the sun god is worshipped, where offerings are made to Ra. Some kings of the 5th dynasty build separate sun temples, massive structures with open courtyards and obelisks, dedicated entirely to the worship of Ra. But the solar religion does not replace the older beliefs. It coexists with them, is layered over them, creating a complex theological system where the king can be both Horus and the son of Ra, where he can join Ra in the sky and Osiris in the underworld, where multiple truths can exist simultaneously without contradiction. This is characteristic of Egyptian religion. It is not systematic, not dogmatic, not concerned with logical consistency. It is experiential, practical, focused on what works, on what ensures the proper functioning of the cosmos, on what maintains Ma'at. Different gods can have overlapping domains. Different myths can tell different versions of the same story. Different theological systems can coexist, can be invoked in different contexts, can serve different purposes. What matters is not consistency but effectiveness, not logic but ritual correctness, not understanding but performance. The festivals mark the passage of time, the turning of the seasons, the key moments in the agricultural and religious year. There are festivals for the inundation, for the planting, for the harvest. There are festivals for individual gods, celebrating their myths, their powers, their relationships with other gods. During festivals, the god's statue is carried out of the temple in procession, displayed to the people, taken to visit other temples or sacred sites. The people participate, watching, celebrating, making offerings, seeking the god's blessing. The festivals are times of joy, of abundance, of the renewal of the relationship between the human and the divine. The king participates in the festivals, or at least the major ones. He performs rituals, makes offerings, demonstrates his piety, his devotion to the gods, his commitment to maintaining Ma'at. The festivals are opportunities for the king to be seen, to connect with his subjects, to reinforce his divine authority. The Sida festival is particularly important. It is a ritual of renewal, performed after the king has reigned for 30 years, and then repeated at intervals thereafter. During the said festival, the king performs a series of rituals designed to renew his power, to prove his fitness to rule, to demonstrate that he is still capable of maintaining Ma'at. The king runs a ritual race, symbolically demonstrating his physical vigor. He performs ceremonies in which he is crowned again, receiving the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, reaffirming his authority over the two lands. He makes offerings to the gods, receives their blessing, is confirmed in his divine kingship. The Sidi festival is not just a celebration. It is a necessity, a way of ensuring that the king's power does not wane, that his divine authority remains intact, that the cosmic order is maintained. And in the afterlife, the king will continue to perform the Sidi festival, will continue to renew his power, will continue to rule eternally. The religion of the Old Kingdom is confident, optimistic, focused on order and stability. The gods are powerful but benevolent. The afterlife is achievable. The cosmic order is secure. There is little sense of anxiety, little fear that the system might fail, that chaos might return. This confidence is reflected in the pyramids, in the temples, in the texts. Everything is designed to last forever, to ensure continuity, to maintain the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, of order and renewal. But beneath the confidence, there are tensions, contradictions, questions that will become more pressing in later periods. What happens if the king fails to maintain Mahat? What happens if the Nile does not flood? If the harvests fail? If enemies invade? What happens if the cosmic order breaks down? These questions are not yet urgent, but they are there, waiting beneath the surface of the Old Kingdom's serene certainty. The administration has become a world unto itself. In Memphis, in the sprawling complex of buildings that surrounds the palace, thousands of officials work each day, managing the affairs of the kingdom. They sit in offices, in courtyards, in shaded colonnades, their papyrus scrolls spread before them, their reed pens moving across the surface, recording, calculating, documenting everything that keeps Egypt functioning. There are officials who manage the granaries, tracking the flow of grain from the provinces to the capital, ensuring that there is enough stored to feed the workers on royal projects, to sustain the population during lean years, to provide offerings for the temples. There are officials who oversee the treasury, managing the wealth that flows into the royal coffers: gold from Nubia, copper from Sinai, tribute from foreign lands, taxes from every nome in Egypt. There are officials who supervise building projects, who organize labor crews, who solve the engineering, problems that arise when constructing pyramids and temples. There are officials who administer justice, who hear disputes, who apply the king's law to the countless small conflicts that arise in any society. And above them all is the vizier, the king's chief minister, the one who coordinates everything, who ensures that the machinery of state runs smoothly, who serves as the king's eyes and ears throughout the kingdom. The vizier's responsibilities are staggering. He oversees the entire administration, from the highest officials to the lowest scribes. He manages the royal estates, the lands that belong directly to the king, that provide the resources to support the court and the building projects. He supervises the law courts, ensuring that justice is administered fairly, that disputes are resolved, that order is maintained. He also serves as the king's representative in religious matters, overseeing the temples, ensuring that offerings are made, that festivals are celebrated, that the gods are properly honored. In theory, the king performs all these functions himself. In practice, the vizier does most of the actual work, acting in the king's name, wielding the king's authority. The position requires extraordinary ability, absolute loyalty, and tireless dedication. The vizier is usually a member of the royal family or a trusted official who has proven himself over many years of service. He is rewarded with wealth, with honors, with a tomb near the king's pyramid, with the promise of eternal life in the king's presence. The provinces are governed by nomarchs, provincial governors who administer the individual nomes on behalf of the king. In the early Old Kingdom, these positions were appointed by the king, held for a limited term, then rotated to prevent any single family from becoming too powerful in a particular region. But by the later Old Kingdom, the pattern is changing. The nomarchs are becoming hereditary, passing their positions from father to son, establishing local dynasties that rule their nomes for generations. They are building their own tombs in their provincial capitals rather than at the royal necropolis, decorating them with scenes that emphasize their own achievements rather than their service to the king. This is not yet rebellion. The nomarchs still acknowledge the king's authority, still send tribute to Memphis, still participate in royal building projects. But they are becoming more independent, more confident in their own power, less dependent on the king's favor. The economy of the Old Kingdom is based on agriculture, on the annual cycle of flood, planting, and harvest. The Nile provides the water and the fertile silt. The farmers provide the labor, and the land produces grain in abundance. Wheat and barley, the staples of the Egyptian diet, the foundation of the kingdom's wealth. But the economy is not purely agricultural. There is trade, both internal and external. Goods move up and down the Nile. Grain from the south, fish from the delta, pottery from specialized workshops, stone from the quarries. There is no money in the modern sense, no coins or currency. Trade is conducted through barter, through the exchange of goods, through a complex system of equivalences where everything has a value measured in grain or copper or other standard commodities. External trade brings in materials that Egypt lacks. Cedar wood from Lebanon, used for ships and for the roofs of temples and palaces. Copper from Sinai, essential for tools and weapons. Gold from Nubia, used for jewelry, for gilding statues, for decorating temples. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, prized for its deep blue color, used in jewelry and in inlay work. Incense from Punt, a land somewhere on the Red Sea coast, used in religious rituals. These trade networks require diplomacy, negotiation, the establishment of relationships with foreign rulers. Egypt sends expeditions to these distant lands, sometimes peaceful trading missions, sometimes military expeditions to secure access to resources or to punish those who interfere with Egyptian interests. The expeditions are recorded in inscriptions, in reliefs carved on rocks in the desert, in texts that describe the journey, the dangers overcome, the resources obtained. These inscriptions are not just records. They are claims, assertions of Egyptian power, demonstrations that the king's authority extends beyond Egypt's borders, that he can command expeditions to the ends of the earth. The military is not large by later standards. Egypt does not maintain a standing army of professional soldiers. Instead, the military is organized around the same labor system that builds the pyramids. When needed, men are conscripted from the provinces, organized into units, equipped with weapons, and sent on campaign. The weapons are simple: bows and arrows, spears, maces, axes. The Egyptians do not yet have bronze, do not have the advanced metallurgy that will come later. Their weapons are made of copper, of stone, of wood. But they are effective enough for the limited military challenges Egypt faces. The borders are relatively secure. To the north is the Mediterranean. To the east and west are deserts. To the south are the cataracts of the Nile. Natural barriers that make invasion difficult. Egypt's enemies are not great empires, but tribal peoples, nomads, small kingdoms that can be raided or intimidated, but do not pose an existential threat. The expeditions to Nubia are the most frequent. Nubia, the land to the south, is rich in gold, in hard stones, in exotic goods. But it is also inhabited by peoples who resist Egyptian control, who raid Egyptian settlements, who must be periodically subdued. The Egyptian expeditions are punitive, designed to demonstrate power, to extract tribute, to ensure that the trade routes remain open. They are not wars of conquest, not attempts to permanently occupy Nubia. The Egyptians establish trading posts, fortified settlements, but they do not try to govern Nubia directly. They are content to dominate, to extract resources, to maintain their access to the wealth of the south. The expeditions to Sinai are similar. Sinai is a harsh, barren land, but it contains copper, turquoise, and other minerals that Egypt needs. The Egyptians establish mining operations, protected by small garrisons, and extract the resources they need. The local Bedouin tribes are sometimes hostile, sometimes cooperative, but they are not strong enough to seriously threaten Egyptian operations. The expeditions to Lebanon are different. Lebanon is not conquered or raided. It is a trading partner, a source of cedar wood that Egypt desperately needs. The Egyptians send ships to the Lebanese coast, establish trading relationships with the coastal cities, exchange Egyptian goods, grain, linen, papyrus, for the precious cedar that cannot be grown in Egypt. These expeditions are peaceful, commercial, but they still require organization, planning, the ability to navigate the Mediterranean, to negotiate with foreign rulers, to transport massive logs back to Egypt. The cedar is used for ships, for the roofs of temples and palaces, for the masts of the boats that sail the Nile. It is essential to Egyptian civilization, and securing a steady supply is a priority for every king. The Old Kingdom at its height is a civilization of extraordinary achievement. The pyramids at Giza stand as monuments to engineering skill, to organizational capacity, to the ability to mobilize resources on a massive scale. The administration functions smoothly, managing a complex economy, maintaining order, ensuring that the Nile's bounty is distributed, that the gods are honored, that Maihat is maintained. But there are signs of strain, subtle at first, easy to overlook in the midst of prosperity and confidence. The nomarchs are becoming more powerful, more independent. The provincial elites are building their own tombs, establishing their own cults, creating centers of power that rival the king's authority. The system is becoming more decentralized, more difficult to control from Memphis. The pyramid projects are becoming more expensive, more demanding. Each king must build his own pyramid, must demonstrate his power, his piety, his commitment to maintaining the cosmic order. But the resources required are enormous, and they must be sustained over decades across multiple reigns. The mortuary cults of previous kings must also be maintained. The priests must be paid, the offerings must be made, the temples must be kept in repair. As more kings die, as more pyramids are built, the burden grows. The endowments that support these cults are supposed to be permanent, but they require land, labor, resources that might otherwise be used for other purposes. The system is sustainable as long as the Nile floods reliably, as long as the harvests are abundant, as long as there are no major crises. But it is becoming more fragile, more vulnerable to disruption. There are also theological tensions, questions about the nature of the afterlife, about who is entitled to eternal life. In the early Old Kingdom, it seems to have been assumed that only the king had an afterlife, that only he could become Osiris, that only he could join the gods in the sky. But by the later Old Kingdom, the elite are claiming their own afterlife, are building tombs with offering chapels, are establishing their own mortuary cults. The pyramid texts, originally reserved for kings, will eventually be adapted for non-royal use, becoming the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, and eventually the Book of the Dead of the New Kingdom. This democratization of the afterlife is gradual, incomplete, but it represents a shift in belief, a recognition that the king's monopoly on eternal life cannot be maintained, that others can also achieve immortality if they have the resources, the knowledge, the moral worthiness. The Fifth Dynasty sees a shift in royal building projects. The pyramids become smaller, less impressive than those of the Fourth Dynasty. But the kings build sun temples, massive structures dedicated to the worship of Ra, with open courtyards and obelisks designed to honor the sun god who is increasingly seen as the supreme deity. This shift may reflect changing religious beliefs, a greater emphasis on solar theology, on the king's relationship with Ra rather than his transformation into Osiris. Or it may reflect practical considerations, a recognition that the resources required to build pyramids on the scale of Khufu's are no longer available or sustainable. The Sixth Dynasty continues the pattern. The pyramids are smaller still, the administration is more decentralized, the nomarchs are more powerful. The kings still rule, still maintain the fiction of absolute authority. But the reality is changing. The last great king of the Old Kingdom is Pepi Dagers, who comes to the throne as a child and reigns for more than 60 years, possibly more than 90, the longest reign in Egyptian history. His pyramid is built, his mortuary cult is established, but by the end of his reign, the system is breaking down. The Nile floods become irregular. There are droughts, famines, periods when the harvest fails and the granaries are empty. The administration struggles to respond, to distribute what resources remain, to maintain order in the face of growing hardship. The nomarchs become more independent, more willing to ignore the king's authority, to keep the resources of their provinces for themselves rather than sending them to Memphis. The central government weakens, loses its ability to command, to organize, to maintain the systems that have sustained Egypt for centuries. The Old Kingdom does not end with a dramatic collapse, with invasion or revolution. It ends with a slow dissolution, a gradual loss of central authority, a fragmentation into competing power centers. The king still rules in Memphis, but his authority extends only as far as his immediate surroundings. The provinces become independent, ruled by local dynasties, competing with each other for resources and power. This is the first intermediate period, a time of chaos and uncertainty, when the unity that had been achieved with such effort is lost, when the cosmic order seems to break down, when Ma'at is disrupted and the world descends into disorder. But that is still in the future. For now, in the height of the Old Kingdom, Egypt is still prosperous, still confident, still building pyramids and temples, still maintaining the belief that the system is eternal, that the kings are gods, that Ma'at will endure forever. The river keeps flowing, the sun keeps rising, and at Giza the pyramids stand, monuments to an age of achievement, symbols of a civilization at its peak, unaware that the foundations are already beginning to crack. The pyramid stands complete, but the world around it is changing. Not visibly, not in ways that would be obvious to someone standing on the plateau at Giza, looking at the three great pyramids rising from the desert, their white limestone casing still gleaming in the sun. The monuments appear eternal, unchanging, as permanent as the bedrock from which they rise. But beneath the surface, in the villages and provincial capitals, in the offices of the nomarchs and the councils of officials, something is shifting. The certainty that defined the Old Kingdom, the confidence that the system would endure forever is beginning to erode. The Nile still floods, but not always when it should, not always as high as it needs to be. There are years when the flood is weak, when the water barely covers the fields, when the harvest is poor and the granaries are not filled. There are other years when the flood is too strong, when it destroys villages, when it washes away the careful work of irrigation, when it brings destruction instead of life. The priests perform the rituals, make the offerings, recite the prayers that are supposed to ensure the flood's return. The king performs his duties, maintains Ma'at, does everything that is expected of him. But the Nile does not always respond. The cosmic order, which seemed so reliable, so predictable, begins to feel fragile. In the provinces, the nomarchs are building their own tombs, establishing their own mortuary cults, creating their own centers of power. They still acknowledge the king's authority, still send tribute to Memphis, but the relationship is changing. They are becoming rulers in their own right, governing their nomes with increasing independence, making decisions without consulting the capital. The king's officials travel to the provinces, carrying his decrees, attempting to enforce his will. But the distances are great, the journey is long, and by the time they arrive, circumstances may have changed. The nomarchs listen politely, make promises, then do what they think is best for their own regions. The system is becoming decentralized. The power that was once concentrated in Memphis is spreading outward, fragmenting, becoming harder to control. The pyramid projects continue, but they are smaller now, less ambitious. The kings of the 5th and 6th dynasties still build the pyramids, still establish mortuary cults, still perform the rituals that ensure their transformation into Osiris. But the pyramids are not as large as Khufu's, not as precisely built, not as enduring. The resources are still there, the knowledge is still there, but perhaps the will is weakening. Or perhaps the kings recognize that the old certainties no longer hold, that building a pyramid the size of the Great Pyramid will not guarantee eternal life, will not ensure the continued prosperity of Egypt, will not prevent the slow dissolution that is already beginning. The mortuary cults of the earlier kings are becoming difficult to maintain. The endowments that were supposed to last forever are being diverted. The priests are not being paid. The offerings are not being made. The temples fall into disrepair. The statues are neglected. The names of the kings begin to be forgotten. This is the second death, the death that the Egyptians feared more than physical death. To be forgotten, to have one's name erased, to cease to exist even in memory. The pyramids still stand, but the cults that were supposed to sustain the king's cays are failing, and with them, the promise of eternal life. There are texts from this period, wisdom literature, instructions for living that reflect a growing anxiety about the future. They speak of the importance of Ma'at, of justice, of proper conduct. But there is an undertone of uncertainty, a sense that the old order is breaking down, that the rules that once governed society are no longer reliable. One text, the instructions of Ptah-hotep, advises officials on how to behave, how to serve the king, how to maintain their positions in a changing world. Another, the maxims of Khagemni, emphasizes the importance of silence, of caution, of not drawing attention to oneself in dangerous times. These are not the confident texts of the early Old Kingdom. They are the texts of a society that is beginning to doubt itself, that is preparing for harder times ahead. Pippi II.'s long reign ends, finally, after more than 6 decades on the throne. He is buried in his pyramid. His mortuary cult is established, but the kingdom he leaves behind is weak, fragmented, barely holding together. His successors rule briefly, ineffectively. The 7th and 8th dynasties are little more than names in king lists, rulers who claimed authority but exercised little real power. Memphis remains the nominal capital, but the provinces are effectively independent, ruled by nomarchs who no longer acknowledge any central authority. The first intermediate period has begun. This is not the end of Egypt. The civilization will endure, will recover, will experience new periods of greatness. The Middle Kingdom will reunify the country, will restore central authority, will build new monuments and create new literature. The New Kingdom will expand Egypt's borders, will create an empire, will produce some of the most famous pharaohs in history. But the Old Kingdom, the age of the Great Pyramids, the time when kings were gods and stone could hold eternity, that age is ending. The pyramids remain, silent witnesses to what was achieved, to the ambition and skill and belief that created them. They will stand for millennia, long after the civilization that built them has vanished, long after the names of the kings have been forgotten and rediscovered and debated by scholars who can only guess at the meanings, the purposes, the beliefs that motivated their construction. The workers' villages at Giza are abandoned. The dormitories crumble. The workshops fall silent. The bakeries and breweries cease production. The sand begins to reclaim the plateau, covering the ramps, filling in the quarries, eroding the smaller structures that surrounded the pyramids. But the pyramids themselves endure. They are too massive to be destroyed, too well built to collapse, too perfectly engineered to succumb to time and weather. The casing stones will eventually be stripped away, taken to build other structures in Cairo and Memphis. The entrances will be lost, rediscovered, lost again. Treasure hunters will break into the burial chambers, will steal what they can find, will leave the sarcophagi empty, but the pyramids will stand. The river keeps flowing as it has always flowed, as it will always flow. The sun keeps rising, bringing light to the desert, illuminating the pyramids, casting long shadows across the plateau. The cycle continues, eternal and unchanging, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations, to the ambitions of kings, to the beliefs that once seemed so certain. The age of the Great Pyramids is over. But the pyramids themselves remain, monuments to a time when humanity believed it could build eternity, when kings were gods, when stone could hold the promise of eternal life. And in their silence, in their endurance, in their refusal to yield to time, perhaps they have achieved something close to what their builders intended. Not eternal life for the kings who commissioned them, but eternal presence, eternal witness, eternal reminder of what was once achieved on this plateau, in this desert, along this river. The story continues, but it continues elsewhere, in other times, in other forms. The Old Kingdom has ended, but Egypt endures. The pyramids stand, waiting, watching, holding their secrets, their mysteries, their silent testimony to an age that will never come again,